Welcome to the We Rock DM Amplified podcast. I'm Daniel Bissett here with my co-host Tricia Ulberg, and today we're thrilled to welcome Tony Passey. Tony is a marketing professor at the University of Utah and a key figure in the Master of Business Creation program where Tricia is currently a student. With over 20 years of startup experience, Tony's been involved in everything from recruiting to e-commerce and marketing. He's the founder of FireToss, a top marketing and web development firm, which was acquired in 2022, but he still collaborates closely with the team. In the classroom, Tony's known for creating hands-on, project-based digital marketing curriculums that give students real-world experience. He's also a leading instructor in the Goldman Sachs 10K Small Business Program and has earned accolades like the Utah V100 and MWCN 100. Tony, we're excited to dive in. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tony.
Hi. Hey, Tricia, Daniel, awesome to be here. Very exciting.
Yes.
So glad you were able to join us today, all the way from over in Utah. So, Tony, the first question I typically like to start this podcast with is, who are you and how did you get here? So
wow,
let's start there.
There goes the next 30 minutes. Here we go. No, I'm just joking. So, I appreciate the intro, and you kind of nailed what's going on with me right now. I'll give you kind of a condensed history of how I ended up here. But at about the age of 22, I started my first startup. And it was one of those things where I was a domain expert. That's what we call the people that grow up in an industry. You know, like I grew up a designer, I grew up a welder, I grew up a plumber. Well, for me, I was a finish carpenter and I grew up around construction, and there was an opportunity to start my own company, and I decided, let's do it. I'm going to start, kind of a home remodel, home improvement company. I'm in Salt Lake City right now, but that company I actually started in the Bay Area in California. And so I was just outside of San Francisco, started a company. I started a second one. I started a third one. And by the time I was in my mid-20s, I had an empire. Like I thought I was invincible. I mean, I was in my 20s, so nothing could go wrong. And I just did not realize being tied to housing and construction and home values was not a great place to be going into a recession. So ultimately, I lost some businesses, had to sell a bunch of stuff. And I kind of had this early midlife crisis reset that went on where I kind of stopped and said, okay, do I really want to own a business, or was I just happier doing whatever the trade was? But what's interesting is even though I was in a very blue collar, very hands-on world, I also had a background in tech. And so I started very early on, 97, 98, building websites, learning to program. You know, back in those days, it was Jazz, Shop Pro, it was Corel Draw. Like we were still trying to figure out what was a JPEG file and a TIFF file, and we didn't know what was going to win. And some of the younger listeners of this podcast will have no idea what we're talking about, but all the precursors to Photoshop and Illustrator, that's the days that I began in, and it was kind of a different time. And we thought Flash was the technology that was going to carry the web forward and make everything cool. So I was big into action scripting. I had a really close buddy, been one of my best friends for over 30 years. We were programming websites and interactive experiences together. And so I was doing that, but to be honest, in 1997, that didn't make any money. Like there was no money in digital. Yeah. And so we didn't know what the internet was really. And just all of it was too new. And I had a family. I got married really early, 21 years old. We wanted to have kids. We wanted to get started. So I just jumped into running a business, and I was very ill-equipped. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't understand financial modeling, didn't know a lot of stuff. So I ended up having a little bit of a reset. I moved back to Salt Lake City after about 7 or 8 years of running my own thing. And I tried working for somebody for a little bit, and I decided, you know what? I'm an entrepreneur. That's really what I am. And not only am I an entrepreneur, I want to master not just running a business. I want to master the full process of starting, growing, building a team, building a self-sustaining value driver, and then exiting and letting somebody else, benefit off of the future value. Because for me, it's not about creating personal wealth. It was about, I really enjoy this process. I like the idea of a couple of people get into a room with nothing going on, and we strategize, we brainstorm, we build something from scratch. And so I became very experienced. I think last count was 14 startups that I was the principal driver, and I think there's about 3 or 4 other ones that I've jumped in and helped. A couple of products that have been launched, and recently an AI company that I helped take to market and get into revenue. So, I mean, there's a lot of startup activity in the last 20 or so years.
It sounds
What's
exhausting.
really weird? What you say?
It sounds exhausting.
You know, I've become very comfortable with a certain level of chaos.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to put it. Like I'm a busy person. I'm not somebody that knows how to just sit down. Like I have 2 modes. I have laying down asleep, and I have vertical going at 100 miles an hour. Like that's just, I don't really have an in between mode. I don't really sit down and watch a movie and just kind of chill. Like I'm either wired or I'm out cold. So and that is part and parcel to being an entrepreneur for so many years. So about 12 years ago, I was in a meeting with the department chair of the marketing department at the University of Utah, and he asked me if I could take on some classes. And I said, yeah, I've got capacity to teach maybe a couple nights each semester. And he's like, whoa, okay, that'd be awesome. And they started to map out what they would want if they had another professor. And they ended up hiring me and asking me to build a set of courses that teach digital marketing. And so I'm 12 years, maybe in my 13th year of teaching digital marketing at the University of Utah. I'm proud of the fact that when I got here, it wasn't much of a program, and now we graduate a really strong undergraduate with an emphasis on marketing, with a good understanding of digital and analytics. And so I feel like I've been instrumental in helping that come a long way. During those 12 years of teaching, I engaged in many startups. And one of the big long-term startups that I did was the agency that you mentioned in the intro. That agency kind of became a launch pad for all the other businesses, having all the marketing and, tech players under one roof that you'd have in a full-service agency, because we did web design, we did art direction, we did, print media, we did digital, we did SEO campaigns, we did pay-per-click and display. I mean, we kind of did everything. We wanted a brand to come to us and just let us take over every part of it. Well, because we were doing that for other people, we thought, why not do that for ourselves? And so we kept coming up with ideas. So we launched 7 different companies out of the agency, and in all different categories. We launched a few online stores that sold doors and windows, that sold printing, that sold, apparel. We created a couple of apps, one for soccer coaching. We created some HR recruiting stuff. Anyway, so going into COVID made me tired. Like COVID was exhausting because we shut down and we had over 50 employees that went home, and we suddenly had this entire work from home workforce. And that's one thing if you are slowly building a work from home workforce, but it's something very different if you've been in the same room collaborating for 10 years and then all of a sudden everybody has to go home. That created some problems, created some communication problems, some HR problems. I mean, we had some problems that we dealt with during COVID that would have set some records in my lifetime. Like I'd never seen some of these things before. And so I took a look around, took a little bit of an inventory, and thought, I think I'm done with payroll. I think I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm done being the boss. Like I don't need another 28-year-old tech superstar coming in my office telling me why they can't pay their bills on $150,000 a year. Like I just I was tired of, and granted, we went through extreme inflation over these last 4 years, and everything got more expensive. And so I sympathize, but I think we got a little ridiculous in the tech industry for a while there. I had a lot of graduates of my marketing program that are making 150, 200,000 a year, and they're less than 5 years out of college. Like it got crazy all across the country. So I just decided I don't want to be the guy writing those payroll checks anymore. I don't want to write the rent check, and I just don't want to deal with it. So I sold a company in 2020, one in 2021, and one in 2022. And in 2022, that was my agency that got acquired. And in 2022, late 22, about this time of year, November, that was the first time in over 20 years that I didn't have a payroll check to write and didn't have any employees and nobody depended on me. So, man, I went skiing. It was a great year for snow. I did a lot of skiing. I played a lot of golf. I mean, it was good times.
Well, I mean, I think that's where Tricia and I are at. Not the bulk of experience that you just ran through, but the desire to not have employees. That's why we have contractors. We bring on incredible contractors. But when a contract expires, we don't have that moral or ethical guilt of owning the responsibility of their next paycheck, And I think that is very, very liberating. And that's worth a lot of money, is not having to carry someone else's dreams as part of your responsibilities because you created something so successful.
I think it's good and it's bad. It depends on really what your goal set is, right? Which is a really important question when you talk to a business owner, a founder, any kind of entrepreneur. You have to decide where you're headed. And for me, employees and infrastructure and that investment was necessary to being able to get up and walk away. I had to build entities that, brands that had value and would churn on without me. And so I know that I took a hit in terms of personal income over the years that I was investing, essentially investing part of my paycheck into employees and training them up and dealing with shortcomings. And so I know that I did that, but I did it so I could have the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
There's so much you have just said that is relatable for both me and Daniel. So much. I've been taking notes of all these things I want to dive back into. Starting from the very beginning, I think Daniel and I both started our website design careers around the same time you did. It was funny listening to you talk about Flash. I was working at ESPN.com as a website designer. That was one of my first design jobs. And they actually brought in the two guys from Macromedia who more or less invented Flash to teach us, because that was going to be such a huge thing for ESPN, right? I remember doing all the Flash. It's so funny how things have evolved. I do think, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what you said about just the industry now, how it's evolved, and what you saw, how you've seen the industry progress through this time span. And what you were saying about how it exploded the past couple of years, I think that's really interesting because it does kind of feel like we're almost going through some. So do you remember the .com bomb? We all went through that. It feels like something else is happening here. Like just the past couple of years, there's a new evolution coming. I think we can all feel that. How do you feel about that? Explain a little bit more. What do you see happening in the industry?
So I think this industry is driven by customers more than anything. I think that there will always be a brand new company that jumps into let's just call it the digital marketing space, whether it's I'm an SEO company, I'm a paid media type company, or I'm doing web design, web development. If you take any of those categories, there are always people jumping into it because realistically, there aren't that many barriers to entry. There's not licenses. There's not education required. It's I got fired at my job, so tomorrow I'm going to go start a company. And that's
I got a laptop and I got Wi-Fi.
Yeah, laptop, Wi-Fi, and a Starbucks, and you're in business, right? And so there's a lot of agencies that have that story that they started because There just was nothing else for them to do at that moment, and this is a way they could make money. And so I think there will always be those amateurs that start at the very beginning, and then there's going to be those much more sophisticated, much more mature organizations. But what happens is there's organizations built for every level of sophistication of client. And so if your client that you're going after is 1,000 to 1 million, it's okay that you just started 6 months ago. I mean, that's totally fine. Like that's a client base that the needs can mostly be answered. But if you specialize, so my agency, we specialized in e-commerce stores that were 50 million to a billion. That was kind of our sweet spot. And that sounds like a crazy number, but it's a lot of e-commerce stores that are well over a billion. And there's actually a lot of providers that are well over a billion. And so, if you guys being in the web design and web development world, if we talked about, okay, well, in a small business world, sub 5 million, who are the players for an e-commerce store? Who are the platforms? You've got Shopify and BigCommerce and WooCommerce, and even like Magento's free version was around for a long time. And then when you jump up to somebody who's 100 million in sales, well, where do they go? And there might be a Shopify premium case there, but when you're getting into the billions, you get into Salesforce Cloud, you get into Adobe's cloud product, you get into Hybris, and so you get into a completely different range. And so in talking about where the industry is going, you kind of have to ask, well, what size company, what size customer are we talking about? In the very highest level, it's becoming about, well, the last 5 years has been about how much data can I get? And there's been this giant grab of let's get as much data in the door as possible. However, what do we do with the data? That's kind of where we're at right now. Is a lot of people have no idea what to do with the data, and that's where AI comes in and helps out.
I was gonna say, I mean, I don't know that we're there for much longer, because I think AI is crunching that data.
The tools are getting built right now, right? There's definitely, and I've seen tools. I've seen tools already that replace hundreds, if not thousands, of analysts in one shot. I think we are headed towards something, and I'd be interested if anybody's ever talked on this podcast about this, but maybe this is a moment of prediction that you're going to see is going to become much more mainstream in the next 5 years. But I think we're on our way to something called an autonomous agent. So right now, you have these AIs like a ChatGPT, which is super common, where you can just conversationally talk to ChatGPT and say, hey, what do you think about this? And then they can give an argument, and you can respond back, and you can hold these conversations. I had a 30-minute long argument with ChatGPT just to see if I could sway the position of this AI, and it was stubborn. You can really get into it. Imagine if that went from just audio to a visual representation of that person. And so, instead of Daniel talks to Tricia, Daniel and Tricia could be talking to Stephanie, and Stephanie can brown hair, brown eyes, and she's 5'6", and you're talking to her in a window just like we're talking right now. But the difference is that that's just going to be an AI, but we're getting really close to the part where we can ask that AI to go in and look at our analytics and find out, why did our Facebook channel work so well last month, and then it's bombing this month? What am I missing? Did something break? And just conversationally that easy, they can go in and find the answer within minutes and bring it back. And right now, the way that functions is we have a meeting with an analyst. The analyst goes to work, and it could be days, if not weeks, before they have an answer. And so we're about to speed up this work, and analytics are going to get much more easy to understand. And I've actually seen the preview of what this looks like from a couple of companies. They're not quite there, but we're really dang close. And so I've seen this already, and I can see that this is going to become very mainstream over the next 5 years. So that's a big one that I think is going to happen. And I think it's going to start at the highest levels the guys that can afford, to have the highest end technology and pay the most for it. And then like most technology, it's just going to get distilled down to smaller and smaller companies until everyone has access to it. And all it's going to take is for, Google to roll out, hey, we have this, in Google fashion, hey, we have this free AI, and you can just log it into your Gmail account and it will just do all of your work for you. And no more do you need to use, analytics for.
Right.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, right. So we actually talk about this not on the podcast, but Daniel and I talk about this all the time, especially as it relates to students. We get asked all the time, what to expect from the digital marketing agency industry. And I think that the AI is making people nervous, for sure. There's all the panic about what jobs are going to go away. There's, uncertainty on how it's going to be used. We do talk a lot about the analytics and how we think that's going to be replacing a lot of that and making it better. SEO, right, is going to be different and improved. I don't think that I do. So my personal perspective is the creativity, the human creativity is not going to be lost or replaced by AI. I hope that's true anyway. I feel like that the humans will still be behind, the creative. But a lot of the analytic stuff is going to change. That's kind of what we think is going to happen too.
Well, I think so too. But to your point, analytics numbers aren't just numbers; they're stories. And unpacking the story behind the numbers may prove challenging for AI, at least in the beginning, if they're stuck in an echo chamber. But the more influence we have on the tools from the early onset, then I do think that they can learn quote unquote creativity. And then then watch out.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
This is the thing we debate.
Yeah. Tony, I'm curious, with the AI looming, what impact is that having on your marketing courses that you're providing, and are you changing or forecasting expectations to change in the near 2 to 3 years as far as like provision of material?
So I guess you kind of have to understand what programs are really preparing students for which jobs out there in the marketplace. And, there's definitely a component of analytics in the marketing field. But in my agency and in most of the agencies I've seen, the deep, heavy lifting in analytics were not done by marketing majors. They were actually more done by information systems, mathematics. We have a degree at the University of Utah called QAMO, which is a quant degree. Like those, and even we have a master's in business analytics. Those are the degrees that honestly I would be a little more nervous if I was a student in those programs, because those are the ones that are ripe for AI just, kicking butts. I worry about some of the jobs for those. And I think what they do is they focus more on, creating with AI, and they focus more on the programming, the building, and, building automation sequences. And I think there's still a whole new realm of jobs that get creative that we're not even thinking of at this point, which is what happens with every evolution in technology. I mean, the internet has brought so many jobs. AI is going to bring, tens of thousands of jobs. I'm not worried about that. But in my classes, it's really hard to take a student and teach him in a classroom and make him a master of email marketing or a true master of search engine optimization. And so the other problem in an academic setting is, like AI, things change all the time. So do we need to know how to get in and search analytics and really understand every screen inside of Google Analytics 4? Or is it really more about teaching the fundamentals of how analytics are collected, how they can be utilized, how to go through a problem solving experience? And so we have a lot of experiential stuff that we do
Yeah.
here in our business school. And I'll give you one example. So we have a competition. It's called the Game Day Ad Analytics Competition that we set up to give some extracurricular experience to these students. And as you know, Super Bowl advertising is a huge thing. So many brands launch their big creative for Super Bowl advertising. And, it's $5 million to $6 million, depending on where you're buying your 30-second spot. But, call it $5.5 million roughly to buy 30 seconds during the Super Bowl. So, and there's some of them buy 3 and 4 spots, and some of them have 10 to 20 million just in production value going into that commercial. And so there's a lot of money spent. So we do a data analytics competition where we pull down all the at mentions, hashtags, all the tweets related to Super Bowl and those brands during from opening kickoff till the final whistle. We pull down all of those tweets, and it's somewhere around 2 or 3 million tweets that we pull in. And so Doritos will have a rap battle with Morgan Freeman and Peter Dinklage. That was from a few years ago. There was like a Doritos Mountain Dew collaboration thing. And the internet just exploded. Like everybody's on Twitter, like hashtag Morgan Freeman, hashtag Doritos. And then we will pull those in and run a sentiment analysis and figure out, are they positive? Are they negative? What are they saying? And then we'll hand these giant data sets to the students and say, okay, look at this and figure out what does a company need to care about? If you're building Super Bowl commercials, what can we know from this analytics data? And we dispatch 50 teams, and we have 50 teams of about 4 students each. And they spend about 2 weeks just sorting through data, building visualizations, and then they come in and they present to a panel of judges. And the judges are, some pretty highly resumed, highly credentialed people that are sitting there judging this. And anyway, it's a huge competition that really what it's teaching is if there's a business problem and there's a data set, then you can use the data set in a way to answer business problems and find out things and predict the future or solve for future problems. It's more important to me that my students come out knowing those skills of reasoning and creative thought than it is that they can get in and do the grunt work of actually harvesting all that data. I expect that technology takes away the laborious, tedious work, and then we can use our creative brains to really come up with questions and direction and guidance. And so I feel like that was a very long answer to your short question, but I feel like our classes are very well suited right now to prepare this generation that's graduating to handle what AI is going to throw at them, because we're focused on the concepts and the fundamentals and not so much just the nuance of what AI is going to replace.
Yeah, I think that's great. I believe Tricia told you that I just recently started as a professor of marketing at UT McCombs, and I see the same thing there. It's more strategic than it is the nuance of how do I use this particular tool or that particular tool.
I do go through a process of introducing. I feel like that's a big part of what we do in education is open minds to what the possibilities are. So I go through a detailed process in a couple of my classes of introducing each type of marketing and advertising channel. So, we spend weeks on what is search engine optimization, how does search algorithms really work, what are the changes, and we're even talking about search GPT and the future of search. And I don't know if you guys know this, but for the first time ever, Google.com is predicted over the next year to lose market share. People are predicting that, a lot of analysts are predicting that they could lose as much as 50% of their market share to Search GPT when it launches. And so we are right on the brink of the first possible competitor to Google in terms of information search. And so, we're talking about that. We're talking about why does that matter? And if you're 19, 20 years old in the middle of an undergrad degree and you barely know how you got there in the first place, and now you're learning about digital marketing, you've got to take a step back and really consider what does the business care about? Like, who are we serving here? If you go out and do a digital marketing degree and then eventually a career, it's that business owner that's, 10, 20, 30 years ahead of you that has weathered so many storms and is nervous about, okay, what is this next thing going to do to us? And so I'm trying to spend my time teaching them, this is search engine optimization, this is paid search, this is display, this is retargeting, this is email, this is affiliate, this is influencer. So we're going through all these different channels in my classes. And again, while AI enhances every single topic I mentioned, it doesn't replace our necessity to know the fundamentals of each of those topics backwards and forwards. We still have to be prepared to drive.
It does create questions around SEO though, especially with Search GPT and how content was created versus how content is currently being created. There are a lot of questions I have of charging for SEO. Is this going to be applicable in the next 2 to 3 years? Because people spend a lot of money on search engine optimization to gain in the SERPs, and then is it going to dissolve? I mean, if Google is losing potentially 50% of market share,
I don't think it's going to dissolve, and I'm positive that your understanding of SEO and if you were to sit down and map out what do we do for SEO activities for a company, your version is going to be very, very different than my version.
Sure.
And I think the difference is what we've been seeing in the last 10 years in the SEO world in the $1 billion and up brand versus the $1 billion and down brand. And so to a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, the prevailing thought out there is it's all about content creation and right. Let's get more content with more keywords on the site and essentially a larger land grab. But I have a very strong argument against that. And in fact, if you were to sit through one of my classes, you'd come out of there saying, wow, this guy's really down on content creation. What is his problem? Why is he so against what 90% of SEO companies are doing? And it stems from, I was a business owner. I did a lot of SEO for my companies long before I ever owned an agency. I got into the agency world because I was fed up with so many bad providers that when I went in to look at, okay, what's the next company I should create? I had this idea. I want to create a company that is the agency that I wish I could have dealt with for the last 10 years, right? And so during the first 10 years of my career, I handed hundreds of thousands of dollars to advertising and marketing companies, expecting results and getting very little, and realizing that, I could hand 10 grand to a marketing outlet or an advertising agency, or I could spend that 10 grand going out to a face-to-face home and garden show or trade show, and I would get so much more business out of the face-to-face interaction. So why am I handing money to somebody else? And really trying to figure out, is there a reason to even have a marketing agency? Which, what it is to me is it's a balanced approach. We are so fragmented in our focus that a business needs to have a plan for how they answer web queries as much as how they influence on social and reach out to people, as much as how they re-engage people. I think that display is still a very valid channel. I think I've personally had a lot of success in display, in OTT, over the top video. So like you're streaming to your Hulu and your Amazon. And there's technologies out there like addressable video where you can literally take a neighborhood and pick the houses where you want to show your videos and just have your video show on those houses' TVs. And I mean, there's crazy technology out there. So I think a varied approach is the right approach still. But when you get back to just SEO purely, I think about throwing a party on, a small island in the middle of the Caribbean. Don't worry, we're not going to go into Firefest or anything. But like, imagine I owned an island and I want to throw a party, and I'm going to get out there and I'm going to throw my party, and I'm going to set up drinks and entertainment, and we're going to have like the greatest food and everything will be awesome. But if I forget to invite Daniel and Tricia, there's no chance you're ever going to show up. You're just going to randomly end up on my island. And I feel like sometimes small business websites are like the island in the middle of the ocean. They don't have enough links. They don't have enough publicity. They don't have enough, advertising to even get people to the island. And so writing more content is sort of like going back and rearranging the party every day without ever creating, a boat or an airplane or something that gets people to the party. You can't just be out on an island. And so many times I see small business websites just adding content and fussing with keywords without ever looking at the larger picture of, there is a search engine that has to crawl your site and find relevance among all the other sites. And if you're not doing things to influence how you are viewed, you are missing the very fundamental of what SEO is all about. And I don't think that goes away. I think Search GPT, Bing, DuckDuckGo, Google, Yandex, Baidu, pick a search engine. I think 10 years from now, it's still going to be the same thing, is we're going to be looking for the answers to our questions, and someone has to have relevance to that question. I just don't think that goes away. I think it gets expedited with the ability of AI to go in and do some of that work. But we still have to have somebody setting a strategy. And maybe AI sets the strategy, but someone's got to ask it to set the strategy. So there's still very much somebody to control all of that.
I think going back to your point of how you got into the digital marketing landscape, you became an expert in each of those different fields versus somebody who starts out in the space of SEO and that's really the only lane that they know. I think that's when they get stuck in the content is king thought process, where they're just like, they don't see the larger picture. They don't see how display or PPC or social or PR or print, how they all play a significant role. And SEO is just one of those boats, like you said.
So in fairness, I wasn't like the master of all these channels going into starting an agency. I very much didn't want to start an agency on my skill because I felt like that, what you're saying, is the actual problem. Like that was the problem with many agencies I dealt with. They were great at this or great at that.
Yeah.
Social really wasn't a thing. Like my agency started when social pretty much started. So going into the agency life, it was SEO and PPC and some display. Well, the lucky thing that I had is my little friend group from high school. When I went off and started my companies in California and I was in construction, they went into creative design, they went into programming, they went into marketing. And so I actually had kind of a brain trust of people that I could call on. And when I started my agency, my budgets were all built around how many clients do I need to get, how much revenue so I can hire that guy and then this guy and this guy. And 2 years in, I had all my best friends. Like I just had my dream team all in one office. One was actually my brother, and he's like a musician. He tours around the world. He's got a great band, and that pays for most of his livelihood. But he's also very good with e-commerce programming and design, and he's just a really good brain when it comes to e-commerce and building brands that sell direct to the public. I had another buddy that's a front end and a back end developer. Another buddy that's just a creative, in all directions, from sculpture to digital to, he's just that really like creative kind of romantic brain. Really cool guy. I had a couple other people that were analytics and other forms of marketing. And of course, my brain has always gone to the business side of it. And so while I owned an agency, I was definitely the guy that would set up payroll and set up the financials. And that's something a lot of agencies don't have, is they don't start with that business acumen. It has to be learned. But I was coming into it after having started many companies. And so I definitely was the business side. And then over a 12-year run, I became much better in all the areas that I didn't know as much. And so I would say search engine, digital advertising, and then really the business was my focus. But we ran a really good we ran an e-commerce development group and ran it very successfully and worked with some major national brands, fashion brands, sports teams. Like we worked with some really high level players because we had all of that skill. And that wasn't my skill. That was, I was
Right.
able to
That
hire
was a
that
team
in
effort.
and
That was
build
a
that
team
team.
effort.
And,
Yeah.
and it was super enjoyable. It really was.
I love
Well,
this.
go ahead,
I was
Tricia.
just going to
Go
say,
ahead.
hear you talk about from just an education perspective back to what students should, how you teach and what you think is important in marketing. It reminds me a lot of my design degree where we had the fundamentals, right? We had our basic art classes, and then we learned so many. The tools were there, but was not the focus of the class. The fundamentals were the focus because you have to still understand how to design, to use the tool to produce a good design. And I think so much of that gets lost in the design world. And I do agree that some of that gets lost in the marketing world with all the technology. And so I do think it's really important to have the foundations there. I just wanted to add that. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Tony, being mindful of your time, I'm aware that you need to drop off here pretty soon. I have one last question for you, and that is maybe something that you have prepared for your students, but from your life experience, thinking about business, and in particular, let's drill it down to digital marketing. What is the one piece of advice that you would offer to anyone who is getting into business for themselves, that they need to think about and maybe take action on?
Yeah, Daniel, that's a really great question. So, as Tricia mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, she's in our Masters in Business Creation program at the University of Utah, which is a brand new thing. It's, instead of an MBA, it's an MBC, and this is something that is unique to the University of Utah, something we've trademarked, but plan to have this MBC program roll out globally. And my role in that program is kind of twofold. So I'm in the administration, I'm the assistant director of the program, but I also teach literally what you just asked. I'm teaching these startup founders how do we approach a new venture, a new revenue stream, and how do we find, that product market fit, and how do we continue to market and talk to our consumers. And I've seen a ton of businesses that, figured out how to run some Facebook ads and got a little bit of, traction for a little while. And then one day Facebook changes the algorithm, they just run out of steam. Or they were really good at Google Ads, and all of a sudden Google Ads rolls out new products and changes things, and they don't know what settings to push anymore. So I very much, and like Tricia said, very much discourage just being able to push the buttons in whatever the medium is does not make you a success over time. You need to be a creative thinker. You got to have the strategy. So I spend a lot of time teaching my students about customer segmentation. Who are the different segments of customers that we could sell to? We spend a lot of time on personas, trying to dig in deep and understand the psyche of who we're selling to. And then once we know exactly who we're selling to, we know what to tell them, what the value proposition is, like how they are going to understand the value of our product. And then the last part, which is really just the execution, running some campaigns in different channels, super easy because you've defined your audience so well. If you know your audience deeply, you can be successful. If you think you know your audience, a really good test, and this is something kind of hilarious that anybody can do anywhere in the country, but a really good test if you're a business owner and you think you know your audience so well, go over to your favorite convenience store and just hang out for a few minutes and watch consumer behavior in a convenience store. You can take a product like a Coca-Cola. We'll just take a 100-year-old brand, storied brand, Coca-Cola, except for secret. None of my students drink Coke anymore. I can bring Coke all day long in bottled water, and all the water gets drank, and not a single person touches a Coke. So there's a problem with that brand. They know there's a problem. They're buying up everybody else because they know that the actual red Coke brand, it dies off as the generation of Coke drinkers dies off. So, but that said, How many places do they sell a Coca-Cola inside of a 7-Eleven? You can buy it at a fountain. You can buy it in the cold case. You can buy it in a 2-liter bottle. You get a 12-pack of cans. You can get a 1 liter, a 20 ounce. I mean, Coke is represented in 40 places inside of a teeny tiny convenience store. However, every one of those products is designed for a different customer segment.
Yeah.
Nobody goes to the fountain looking at 64 ounces of Coke and says, no, I'm going to get a 2-liter bottle.
Yeah.
That's not the same person. They're there for different reasons. Right. They have different things going on. You probably don't ever think about this, but the 20-ounce bottle is almost 3 times as expensive per ounce as it is at the fountain. Why are we paying triple the price 20 feet away? It's a deep understanding that Coca-Cola has, and all the beverage companies, Dr. Pepper, Pepsi, everybody. But Coke has a deep, deep understanding of who their consumer is, why they're buying, and what makes them go to the register and spend $3
what they're willing to pay
20 ounces of corn syrup, light flavoring, and carbonation. It's crazy.
Yeah, this is where to play. So I have been telling Daniel, this is the focus of the program for me. As I told Daniel, that a lot of the program is fundamental marketing, which I love, and really thinking about who your target audience is and where to play. And that has been the focus of the program for me, is figuring out where we, our agency, should be putting our focus. As you mentioned earlier in the podcast, there's so many different places to play in the marketing, digital marketing. But who is the target audience you're focused on, and how can you serve that audience? And it can't just be so segmented that you're going to, like you said, all of a sudden Facebook changes, you don't have a business anymore. And you really need to think about all the different aspects of what that customer needs from a marketing perspective. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love it. I have to say one last thing, Tony. I had been looking for MBA programs for years, or master's programs. And it wasn't until this program showed up that I was like really excited. I just love the whole concept of teaching students how to start your business and all the thought that goes behind that. It just really resonated with me immediately. This is
why I'm all in on this Masters in Business Creation program, and why I'm investing my time here. Yeah. Is, I've been through these 14 or so startups. I've done okay for myself, and now I'm kind of looking at, okay, I'm in my mid 40s. Where's the rest of my career going to be? And I've decided I like being in academics, because I can be one of those academics that isn't reading out of a book, that actually can say, this is what you do with the attorney. This is what you do with your HR people. This is where you go. This is what you got to watch out for. I've made these mistakes. Don't make this mistake. So I like being that type of a professor. And so I'm working hard to help as many people around. And I think growing this Masters in Business Creation program, we have the online component, which you're a part of. I mean, that has grown into Africa. We're moving into Canada. We've got a few things coming out of the ground in Asia. We'll be in Europe soon. I mean, it's hundreds, and it's going to be thousands that are in the program. It's going to grow. And so I'm excited for that. And that's really where a lot of my focus is going to be.
Yep, it's a great program.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining us. It's fascinating speaking to you. And I totally want to pick your brain, but we'll have to save that for another day. So thank you again for joining us here at We Rock DM. If you ever
want me back, I'm available. And Daniel, you can reach out to me anytime, of course.
Yeah, I knew that it would not be a problem finding things to talk about. We could probably go for another hour or two. So
yeah, I've got a lot more questions.
That was great. Thanks, Tony.
Oh,
yeah, me
all right.
too.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.